digest stuff.
All right.
Perfect.
All right. See your face.
Right. Way to work it out. Thank you.
So it's good to see you, and thank you so much for doing it. It's really great to have you to talk about this important issue, knowing that you have much experience and so much to do with protections against this terrible problem that exists all around the world here. So as we get started, I just wanted to introduce you to a couple of people you can't necessarily see, but that are here. So first of all, Bhavish Patel is on here with us, and he is the chairman of the New Jersey Restaurant and Hospitality Association, and he's a hotelier himself. He actually owns several hotels, and is obviously very passionate about this topic, and he's the one who really wanted us to bring this together for Human Trafficking Month. I also want to mention that we have Mary Lou Halverson here, who's with the American Hotel and Lodging Association. She's actually attending as well. And I want to introduce also Amanda Stone, who I think you know, Amanda, who is
how are you, Congressman?
Married a good friend of mine.
Our government affairs director.
Great to see you.
I'm hiding. My video is not working either, but I'm here.
Oh, great.
All right. Well, we got the most important person on here on video, so that's awesome. I'm going to introduce you, sir. I'm just going to give a little bit of background on some of the things you've done with regard to human trafficking and other things. So just 1 second for that, because I'll go forward with that right now. So Representative Chris Smith was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1980 and serves residents of the 4th Congressional District of New Jersey. A prolific lawmaker, Representative Smith ranks second among all 435 members of Congress in authoring bills that have been enacted into law. Representative Smith is renowned for his legislative efforts in combating human trafficking. He is the author of the nation's landmark Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, the comprehensive historic law designed to prevent modern-day slavery, protect victims, and enhance civil and criminal penalties against traffickers, both within the United States and around the world. Amazing. He has authored 4 additional anti-trafficking laws, including International Megan's Law to establish a system of notification to protect children from convicted pedophiles who may seek to travel to abuse children, which has resulted in nearly 6,000 denials of international travel by known pedophiles to date. And in September, Congressman Smith introduced the Frederick Douglass Trafficking Victims Prevention and Protection Reauthorization Act of 2021 to bolster and enhance successful programs enacted by his previous authored laws. So Smith is the co-chair of the Bipartisan Human Trafficking Caucus, which he co-founded 15 years ago. He has chaired 24 hearings on human trafficking and has received numerous national and international awards for his leadership in fighting to protect victims of human trafficking, who are mostly women and children. Can't thank you enough for all that you've done, Congressman. It's amazing. And please, we welcome you to present to us now. Thank you so much.
Dana, thank you so very much for inviting me and for your leadership, which is extraordinary and does make a difference. It will save women's lives, especially, and children. Increasingly, we're finding that kids, whether it be in Atlantic City or elsewhere, are sold as commodities, and very often they use a hotel or a motel or some other accommodation in order to facilitate the abuse. So thank you for your leadership. And it's great to see, although we don't see her on the screen, it's good to see Amanda again. Thank you for your leadership as well and for your hard work on these issues. You know, I thought I'd give you a little bit of an opening, if you don't mind, a little background, and then take any questions whatsoever that you might have as we go into this Zoom. You know, it's worth noting that when I first introduced the Trafficking Victims Protection Act in the 1990s, the legislation was met with a wall of skepticism and outright opposition, dismissed by many as a solution in search of a problem. Several members of Congress actually turned me down when I asked them to co-sponsor the bill. For many at the time, including lawmakers, the term trafficking applied almost exclusively to drugs and weapons, not to human beings. Reports of vulnerable persons, especially women and children, being reduced, like I said, to commodities for sale, were often met with surprise, incredulity, or outright indifference. Top officials in the Clinton administration testified against major provisions of my bill, about 80% of it, because I ran all the hearings, and they were against it. They liked some of it, but didn't like most of it, and said, for example, that naming, shaming, and sanctioning countries, because this is a domestic and international law, with egregiously poor records on human trafficking, including and especially government complicity, would be, quote, counterproductive. We overcame the naysayers. We persisted. I'm happy to say it was bipartisan. It took over 2 years to muster the votes for passage, and my bill was finally signed into law on October 28, 2000. So last year, we did celebrate in the year 2020, the 20th anniversary of the bill. Within a year after the enactment of the bill, of the law, nobody was arguing anymore that the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, its integrated strategy of what we call the 3 Ps, prevention, protection for victims, and prosecution for the traffickers, nobody was saying it was flawed anymore or unworkable or counterproductive. And that only happened over the course of 1 year. Everybody was on board, which I was so grateful for, because implementation is even more important, frankly, than passing a bill. If it sits on a shelf and doesn't get implemented, what good is it? For the record, the TVPA created a whole new whole of government, domestic and international strategy, and established dozens and dozens of brand new programs. And as you pointed out, Dana, over the years, I authored 4 additional laws in 03, 05, 2016, and again in 2019. The TVPA included a number of sea change criminal code reforms, including treating as a victim of trafficking and not a perpetrator of a crime anybody who was recruited, harbored, transported, or obtained for the purpose of a commercial sex act or for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. And also, if anybody under the age of 18 is automatically deemed to be a trafficking victim as well. So, we throw out the idea that there's such a thing as a teenage prostitute under the age of 18 or minor. They are now under federal law, pursuant to this law, trafficking victims. We have in the language that the fine would be up to 20 years. And for somebody who is 14 or less, it's up to life imprisonment. So we said it's time to throw the book at it. I remember talking to several U.S. attorneys while we were writing the law, and even the U.S. attorney in New Jersey told me at the time, first of all, he said, we're talking drugs, right? I said, no, human beings. I said, what's the penalty? He said, the penalty is so small that from a prosecutorial discretion point of view, we don't even prosecute them. They're not even looking for them. So having a time in prison that's commensurate with the crime itself certainly empowers and incentivizes our prosecutors to take this seriously. And lo and behold, thousands of human traffickers have been prosecuted. Everybody hears about the case of Jeffrey Epstein. All the charges brought against him were brought pursuant to the TVPA. And even the convictions involving Smallville actress Allison Mack and others in that cult were brought by that as well. That said, believing that the federal law needed parallel state and local statutes to effectuate a prosecution strategy, the law including new DOJ programs to assist states in crafting their own laws. Take the model. If you can prove it, please do. And New Jersey and many other states, I am so happy to say, took that advice, and DOJ certainly encouraged it pursuant to our law, and said, here's a model. If you can improve upon it, do it, but at least get these essentials into your state law. The act also established shelters and a national hotline. On the refugee side, the international component, it created a new asylum category called the T visa to protect victims and their families. Not only the victim herself, because fear of reprisal often keeps them in the brothel or whatever it might be, because they'll say, oh, we're going to go get your sister, or we know where she lives. Well, this allows the entire family to get that asylum. It also created the President's Interagency Task Force to monitor and combat trafficking, the State Department's Trafficking Persons Office, which is now a very robust office, and every single embassy around the world has designated personnel who then feed back information so that it's a full court press every single year. And at the end of the day, every year, they produce a very comprehensive TIP report, TIP, Trafficking in Persons report, and we do sanction those countries that are put onto Tier 3 so that there's a penalty phase for the country if they indeed do these terrible things. In 2019, as you mentioned, Dana, the Frederick Douglass Trafficking Victims Prevention and Protection Act, I authored that one, and that put $430 million into the effort and had a number of good provisions, but one of them was to ensure that our young people are situationally trained to spot the telltale signs of trafficking and to know when, how quickly the drugs come into play in order to make her or him more vulnerable and more susceptible to the exploitation. We also put in the bill a requirement about pilots and flight attendants to have their training, this whole idea of situational training. And frankly, that came out of a tremendous proposal. And I actually hosted a training summit in 2009 with the Airline Ambassadors International, Department of Homeland Security and others, to say, we need more eyes and ears on this problem across the board. And certainly flight attendants and pilots and everybody else, they see things. And if they know, they report it to the pilot. When the plane lands, there's somebody waiting at the disembarking gate to check out the situation. And it has made another huge difference in liberating women, because it's mostly women that are trafficked, and getting the perpetrators of these terrible crimes. I have introduced a bill, it's called the Frederick Douglass Act of 2021. It's bipartisan. Karen Bass, my friend and colleague from California, is the chief Democratic co-sponsor. It provides $1.6 billion, and again, does a tremendous, comprehensive on trying to ensure, there's wraparound social services for victims, accountability for U.S. government, strengthens laws to protect victims and witnesses during investigations, provides for victim housing, and then permanently incorporates the U.S. Advisory Council on Human Trafficking as part of the U.S. government's commitment to survivor-informed policy. One of the things that I have found most important is to listen, all of us have found this, to the survivors. When we couldn't get the bill out of committee back in 1999, I brought over women that I and my wife had met in St. Petersburg, Russia, who had been rescued. And these women came to the hearing and told their story, incredibly brave women, about what they went through each and every day. And you could have heard a pin drop at that hearing, and that helped us get the rest of the Congress to say, if not us, who? Let's just get this done to protect victims like these brave women who had come forward. And you did mention Megan's Law, Dana, and I just want to say about Megan's Law, the international Megan's Law took 8 years to get passed. I'd introduced it back in 2008, and we kept passing it in the House. It kept failing in the Senate through indifference and inaction. Finally, in 2016, we got it passed. And I think everybody knows Megan Kanka is that little girl that lived in my hometown of Hamilton. She was just 7 when she was kidnapped and raped and brutally murdered in 1994. And every state of the Union and the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico all have a Megan's Law. And it has worked. It has worked very well. We now have databases. And the thought was, why don't we share those who have committed these crimes against children when these pedophiles go and travel? They're out of prison, but they still, sadly, the proclivity to commit these crimes is extraordinarily high, and that's based on so much social science. So I offered we would tell countries of destination when they were coming, and it was up to them because we can't bar them from traveling by law, but we can advise countries like Thailand or Russia or many of the countries in Central and South America, including Brazil, which is a destination area. And lo and behold, as you mentioned a moment ago, we have found 6,000 convicted sex offenders have been denied entry already. It's only been in effect for a couple of years. And that's notwithstanding COVID, where there's been a less travel, as we all know, and you know especially. And so it has made a difference, and I think a very big difference. Even people from the Center for Missing and Exploited Children, like Ernie Allen, he's an icon in the effort. He said it is clear that there is a substantial category of offenders who do not offend as a lapse of judgment. They do it as a lifestyle, and they travel under the cloak of not the people not seeing them. They're just cloaked, and nobody knows who they are. Now they know who they are, and we put reciprocity into the bill in the hopes that there would be a major effort to tell us when convicted pedophiles in other countries are traveling here, and that's happened, but to a lesser extent. So, one of the things that I am so grateful to you for, in our new bill, we have language to encourage preferred place of accommodation checkoff for the federal government. I mean, we need to be all on the same page. You are, and we work very closely with the Restaurant and Hospitality Association, with all of you on the federal level as well, to come up with good language that's in the bill to ensure that GSA would, when somebody from Homeland Security or elsewhere wants to travel, they're going to a conference, they look to see whether or not there's a checkoff on this preferred place of accommodation. And that just means situational awareness training for the concierge, for the others in the hotel. And we worked out language that you have embraced totally. And our hope is we get that into law in this new Frederick Douglass Act that is pending in the House. So I can't thank you enough for your concern and interest, because it makes such a difference. You're on the front line every day. And we have found it almost like after the pandemic that occurred in the so-called Spanish flu, there was the Roaring 20s when people came out of the lockdowns of that year and the deadliness of it years. There's a pent-up demand by the exploiters, and we saw it online as more exploitation took place there. ECPAC and other great NGOs have chronicled all of that. And so the hotels and motels and the entire industry, I think, is in a situation where they'll be looking to exploit even more. So having that situational awareness training is absolutely critical to protect lives, women and children especially. So, Dana, thank you.
Thank you. I mean, it's fascinating and horrifying at the same time. And I can't say enough how much we appreciate all the years that you've put into passionately fighting to help these victims. So, and stop this horrible action. So, I do have some questions from some of the people. And I wanted to point out first, I had mentioned Bhavesh Patel is our chairman and a hotel owner himself, so very close to this issue, and has been fighting to make sure that staff are aware and trained well, as you just said. As a side note, I want to thank you very much for your support of the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, by the way, because of course restaurants have gone through a horrible time as well here, and that money was very much needed. And we're certainly hoping to get some fulfillment of more funds for that, because we have a lot of people waiting who didn't actually get. There were so many applicants that there wasn't enough money to spread around, right? So we're hoping for more money in that note. But the training that's needed for the human trafficking prevention, Bhavesh asked if there's any way that we could get some additional funding to educate and train some of these hotels and key industries that become, pathways to this terrible activity. I don't know if there's a way that we.
I would just parenthetically, the American Hotel and Lodging Association has endorsed our bill, and we worked very closely with them in terms of language to make sure that it really does meet the needs and does not in any way injure the industry. We wouldn't want that ever, but also it's all about protection. The bill does call for the training modules that would be produced. Thankfully, it's not rocket science, and the situational awareness. It can be done in an hour. Of course, it needs to be supplemented with reinforcement, making sure that people know who to call. I remember one of the flight attendants, Nancy Rivard, who's with American Airlines, who's been the pioneer in the airline industry. She said, we would see things that didn't look right, but didn't know how to process it. And she talked about how these little kids were coming out of Dominican Republic and Haiti, and they were with people that just didn't look like they were family. And it was a trafficking scheme for little kids. And finally, they, on their own began to say, there's something wrong here. They would, when one of the women would get up or one of the kids would go to the bathroom, they would, as a flight attendant, which is an authority figure, say, how you doing? Just try to get something, where you going? I don't know. When a 25-year-old woman doesn't know where she's going, that's a telltale sign. And when there's secrecy, looking down, no eye contact, all the telltale signs that Homeland Security has published on their website. So just making everybody aware of that. And most importantly, after that, what do you do? No vigilantism. Don't, jump across the table and tackle the guy, because that, he might have a gun. He might kill everyone, including the child or the woman. But immediately get to law enforcement and have them come and respond and ascertain whether or not there is a trafficking in progress, I should say. And so, yes, our bill would provide monies for that. And it's very important. All of it would be free, available. GSA would promulgate the best practices that need to be followed, working with NGOs. And we have so many. In New Jersey, we got the New Jersey Coalition Against Anti-Trafficking, which is doing magnificent work. All of you, I think, know about the SOAP campaign, where there's a message on the back of the SOAP that says, and I'll read it. You've seen it, of course. Are you being forced to do anything you don't want to do? Have you been threatened if you try to leave? Have you witnessed young girls being prostituted? If so, call 1-888-373-7888 National Trafficking Human Hotline. And calls have come in, when the woman goes in and uses the soap, and it's not glaring or real large, but hopefully, because you don't want the pimp to see it either. But it's all a matter. And, we have found in the hospitals, particularly in emergency rooms, a study was done a few years ago, a couple studies that were done, and we actually responded with legislation that said women do go to the emergency rooms. 59%, according to one study, at some point go to an emergency room, and the woman might be bruised badly, and questions aren't asked. It's almost like you got to separate it from the guy that's waiting out there and pacing to get his property back, so he can abuse her some more. So that's changed completely. And our healthcare facilities in New Jersey are in the process of being trained. The woman that I met years ago, who is the wife of the CEO of Quest, which has played a big part in the pandemic in testing, Quest Diagnostics. She took that on and got both of our major hospital chains in New Jersey, pardon me, to train their personnel. And, again, it's all about situational awareness. If you're prepared, eyes are wide open, there's a duty to intervene, but to do so in a prudent way that, brings law enforcement in, always with that in mind. And it has made all the difference in the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
And many of the hotels, as you all know, have done it. It's all in the process. Whether it be the big ones like Hyatt or others, they have really embraced this. And we want it to be from top to bottom, the smallest hotel to the largest, to be situationally aware. And that's the beauty of, our language will only affect where people, it'll be available to everybody in the hotel industry, but it'll affect, this whole idea of, getting the check off, which is an encouragement to the bureaucrats when booking to say, are they on the right page with trafficking? And we've seen even, in the past, there have been horrible situations where bureaucrats travel to Hawaii and elsewhere and themselves engaged in terrible things. So it starts this whole idea that this is these are victims that we just have to embrace and protect no matter what. That's one of the things I learned from all the hearings and meetings. My wife and I, when we brought those two women over from St. Petersburg, we spent about 4 to 5 hours at a NGO called Miramed in St. Petersburg, Russia. I had offered a resolution to an OSCE Parliamentary Assembly on trafficking, and it was a very hard fight because the Russians thought we were just criticizing them. And I said, no, do you like the fact that women are in New York and New Jersey from Russia being raped every night? And boy, did that get them to say, what are you talking about? And then we shared with them the statistics, and it was, the Russian mafia was selling women just like they sell drugs. And the same way with gangs and organized crime today. And it's all integrated. And, sometimes it's just a small group, but it's very often a very large group. But it wasn't until many people heard what these women go through. It was just mind-boggling. And the drugs, are used to keep them docile and more prone to be abused, so that destroys their lives from the drug point of view, drug abuse point of view, and from the exploitation point of view. And one of the nice things is that we put a very heavy emphasis in previous laws I've done, and others too, at the state level, to get these women employed in gainful employment. I've been in shelters all over the world and in the United States, and that's one of the greatest things, to see, again, a very courageous young woman who's now either, got a good job somewhere or a reasonably good job, but also some of them get into the fight too, to try to protect other women.
Absolutely. I do want to make mention that Mary Lou Halverson wanted to thank you very much for all the support that you've given working with them on this with their federal team on the issue. Obviously, it's so important, and she just wanted to emphasize that with you today. Well, thank you. I also want to mention that we have a person who's attended named Jamie Lynn Rose, and she wrote a little note to you and a question. She said she's actually a survivor of sexual assault, which included trafficking as well as domestic violence. And she's also in the hospitality industry now, and she has a master's degree with a certification in global emergency management administration. Good for you, Jamie Lynn. In her studies, she came to find that there's a direct correlation between international terrorism and human trafficking. The UN categorizes that as the largest funding source for foreign terrorism alongside drug trafficking. The statistics also show that over 1 million children witnessed domestic violence in their home last year, according to the FBI statistics. 33% of those children were subjected to sexual violence in some way. The reason she's mentioning all of this is because domestic violence also bears a direct effect on domestic terrorism, with 60% of active assailants, active shooters, having some affiliation to domestic violence. This is just mind-blowing statistics and things to hear here. But having some affiliation to, so these laws are great, but of course, she's asking if there's other legislation, stronger legislation to actually aid and assist the victims for domestic violence. She wanted to check in on that.
The answer is yes, both state and federal laws. When I did the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, Part B of my law was the Violence Against Women Act, which provided then $3.4 billion over 5 years for whether it be on campus or domestic shelters for women to get to a safe haven, and other interventions, and also making the police more informed, as to how to deal with this. And the same with police training on trafficking itself. One of the things that George W. Bush did after we got our law passed was to travel around the country in what he called rescue and restore meetings. And they were really great one-day meetings. One of them was in the Archdiocese of Newark, which hosted it. They had prosecutors, police, NGOs, faith-based and non-faith-based, and other, stakeholders all meeting for one day about trafficking. And one of the messages to the police was that, the traditional view of vice and treating the woman as the criminal needs to be, based on federal law, changed. Anybody who's not 18 is not a criminal. She's a trafficking victim, even if it's just one commercial sex act. And if there's any element of force, fraud, or coercion, and there so often is, it's a trafficking victim as well. And the federal penalties can be, imposed on that person or persons doing it, not the victim. The idea is to put sandbags around the victim to protect her. And in terms of the nexus between terrorism. Thank you, Jamie Lynn, for reminding us of that, because that is extraordinarily important. Whether it be radical Islamist groups like Boko Haram, and I've been to Nigeria many, many times. I've been to places where they've killed. I remember the Chibok girls and so many others who have been kidnapped. And each of those cases, they turned those women into trafficking victims. They've exploited them, they rape them, and then they beat them to the point where many become submissive. Some do resist right to the end, and they die. I mean, it's horrible. But we know that ISIS trafficked women, made women into sex slaves, but they also sold them for like commodities. And terrorists, almost by definition, because they're so violent prone, this is just another manifestation, whether it be a Boko Haram group or some other terrorist organization. And trafficking is a very serious way for them to procure funding for their other nefarious purposes, like blowing up buildings and people. So it's a great point, and it's the same way with gangs. We've had gangs in my district. When Trenton was in the district, we had Honduran gangs that were bringing women in and selling those young Honduran women in the city of Trenton and elsewhere, but they came in through there. We also had a case in Lakewood where there were a number of Mexican young women who had been trafficked via the gang. Thankfully, they were intercepted by law enforcement and repatriated with their families. So that's a good thing. If they needed asylum, they would have gotten it. But when there's a good place to get back to, like a loving family, that needs to be done. And so, but this idea of, we've stressed this with Homeland Security over and over again, that this is a source of tremendous amounts of funding for terrorist activity and the exploitation of women, which we've seen in wars forever. Women exploited when the conquering marauders come in, as the Russians did when they came into Berlin and elsewhere. Well, it continues today with the terrorists. So we are doing more on that. We're always raising it. On this presidential agency, I made sure, because I wrote the law, and over the years we've added additions. We got DOD on there, we got Homeland Security, and they sit at the table with the Department of State, Health and Human Services, HUD, and all the other agencies. How do we integrate everything to make sure that we protect the victims and go after with very, very high intensity the traffickers, and again, some of whom are terrorists as well. So it's a great point that Jamie Lynn Rose makes. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jamie Lynn. The Trafficking Victims Protection Act, Mary Lou was asking what the timeline is on reauthorizing that bill.
Great. And, I would have thought it should have been done last September. One thing about federal laws, many of them do not get reauthorized when they expire by a new statute. Usually the appropriations bill or what we call a continuing resolution, a stopgap funding measure, just puts a blanket reauthorization for as long as that appropriations bill is in effect. The problem is it doesn't change and improve or enhance, in most cases, any of the programs, which is why we want a reauthorization, which is why we put sunsets in these bills. I mean, in the first one in 2000, I put a sunset in for 2003 because I wanted to have an ambassador at large, not a director of the tip office. We couldn't get it. So I wanted to come back as soon as we could. And we wanted to get a quick lessons learned in those first 2 years, 3 years, to figure out how do we make it better. what do we learn in those couple of years? And we learned a lot. A lot about procurement. We learned that peacekeepers were a problem. When we found out that in places like the Democratic Republic of Congo, which, as you know, has had huge amounts of loss of life due to terrorism and fighting, that the peacekeepers deployed there by the UN were complicit in human trafficking, particularly of little girls and boys, 13 and 12 years old. I went over there, held 4 hearings on it, and then put language in the next bill, No. 5, again, a quick sunset, in order to improve that and hold peacekeepers to account and have a code of conduct that would ensure that they are on the protection side, not the persecution side. And, so while the bill has not been, Frederick Douglass has not been reauthorized per se with a new statute, it is still authorized via the continuing resolution that we're living under. And that ends in mid-February, and it will be reauthorized again. This is the big stopgap money program for the U.S. government. And about $800 billion, last time I looked, of federal programs have not been reauthorized. They just get a new life, thank God for so many of them, because they're so important, by way of the appropriations process. But we want the new bill, and I tried very hard to get it when it expired on September 31st, the old one, because we got so many new things in there, including, the language for the hotels and motels that we've worked with you so closely to craft. So we learned things that we didn't know. When I tried to do this a couple of years ago in the 2019 Act, we had a flaw in it that the hospitality industry pointed out, and we fixed it in this bill. You know what that was? That a hotel, when it has people who are contracted out to, to some other subcontractor, should you be the ones that have to do the training, or do they? And you had to do it. And that would have been an undue burden, I think, on the hotels. And we didn't know that. I didn't know. That's why I love hearings. That's why I love, input from you guys, because, whoops, let's fix that. And we did. And now they have to do the training. You have to do your concierge and, the people at the desk and others. But other people who are brought in as contract workers, they have to do that training. So thank you for that. Thank you for that improvement.
Thank you for your help with that. That's great. I also want to mention Denise Bexon is here with us. She's a member of our board. She's with Maurice Pierce. You may have met her. She's a proactive and very passionate speaker for our industry. I wanted to ask you on her behalf, obviously you're aware that the J1 issue, we know you're aware of the J1 issue that we had with the Jersey Shore, particularly last year, with the summer season already being inundated with the COVID fallout, and then also the labor shortage. But the J1 just crippled our communities along the shoreline that needed those normal seasonal workers from overseas. Right. So speaking of Omicron, how it's affected travel and all of that, certainly want to be clear on how we certainly wouldn't want Omicron to be delaying or postponing any of the J1 program any longer, and where we might stand with alleviating that situation again this year. Do you have any thoughts or input on that?
I have concerns. I think it's a great program. My wife and I love the boardwalk in the Jersey Shore. I proposed to her on a jetty in Belmar, back in 1976. So I love the Jersey Shore, and I know how important it is to the vendors and the businesses to have those young people, especially who come in on the J1. I'm not sure with this administration. It's an open question as to how much of a lockdown. The president has talked about no lockdowns, and then the latest variant has caused renewed concerns as to what do we do. So I don't have a fix for that. I apologize. I want it to be as robust as can be. I want us all to, within the parameters of good science, to be out and about. But those who should get vaxxed, based on the underlying age and all those other things. But I'm not sure where it's going to go going into, because I know you got to be doing planning even now.
Yeah, it's a big concern because normally the process starts like in the fall, and it already wasn't as of maybe October when people would normally see this starting to bubble up, and so we're very nervous about that, to be honest with you, in the tourism industry, which is of course hotels and restaurants as well. I just, I want to ask you right now, is there anything further that comes to mind that hotels could do to help you with your pursuit to end human trafficking? It's a big question, but I know obviously the situational awareness training, and as many of the hotels that can put that into place is certainly something that we'll continue to spread awareness on and make available. But anything further that maybe you could speak to some of our hoteliers that we could do further to help?
I think helping all of us make sure that the victims are, and others do not become victims. If there's a situation where somebody is a trafficking victim and seeks employment, you might be very open to having somebody. It might be easier for the bigger hotels to think about that, but have somebody on staff that could. In this working group that we have here in Washington, and this is now being done at the OSCE, and just a little sidebar, the OSCE is the equivalent of NATO, but to human rights and democracy, and I have been the chairman of the Parliamentary Assembly for the U.S. delegation for years, but now I'm serving as the special representative for human trafficking for the OSCE. It's 57 countries, including Russia, all of Europe, Canada, and the United States. And a lot of countries in the Middle East that are observers, like Israel and Egypt, but the others, So again, I've offered 18 resolutions. We've gotten what I do is I take our bills that become law, or ideas that we try to become law, and offer them as action plans for others. Even before Ukraine fell or had its war with Russia, as we all know, which is now a possibility again. I had a big conference, 2-day conference, working with the foreign minister of that country on hotels, motels, airplanes, and trains situational awareness. And because many of the women in Dubai and places like that are coerced through deception, and then coerced once they get there into trafficking situations from the Ukraine. And they fly in the Ukrainian airlines. So they, began a situational awareness training that day, the first day we had the conference, of some of their flight attendants, and they've rolled that out ever since. So I think we got to be careful that there's no compassion fatigue. With human rights work and humanitarian work, sometimes people say, been there, done there, got the T-shirt. This has to be continually ratcheted up. In order to protect the victims and hopefully to give less space for the victimization. The hotels have units, that's a space where the exploitation can occur. The more that's focused upon and there's an energizing that does not quit, I think we'll see lesser and lesser and lesser of it. When I did the International Megan's Law, the law resulted in a lawsuit out in California, in San Francisco, and it was brought by a whole group of convicted pedophiles with a very clever attorney who brought it into federal court. They judge shopped. They thought they had somebody who would affirm or overturn the law, and thankfully, every aspect of Megan's Law was affirmed, International Megan's Law, and you should have seen the hate mail that I got and the threatening mail. I get death threats. I have one guy who went to prison for 91 days. I don't like to talk about it. I shouldn't even brought it up. So there is a lot of that out there. But in this particular area, this is big money. After drugs comes human trafficking, and then weapons. It used to be, it was number 3, and we think it's now number 2. And the ILO, the International Labor Organization, and others chronicle that it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. So what I'm saying is that we need to accelerate and not lose, think, well, we did the training, now what are we going to do? Just ongoing. Because the next victim walking into your hotel could be a 13-year-old girl who's with some guy who's going to do horrible things. If we could save her from that crisis and that trauma, we've got to do it. It's a duty.
Absolutely. And this is a very, it's a stunning and terrifying issue for sure. And I can't imagine that it doesn't drive a lot of emotion and passion from anybody who listens and thinks about any of this for a period of time. So I can't thank you enough once again. This was great information. And once you're doing what you just asked everyone to do, which is you're just taking the time to spread the awareness, and that sends everyone out there, making sure that we're keeping that at the forefront, and we're telling the rest of the people in our network so that we all know what's going on. Definitely something that we can continue to emphasize here at the association to our members, having the reach that we have on that note. So glad to be informed as much as we can as well, of course. So thank you again, Congressman. Thank you for all the people who also have joined us here today. I encourage anyone to, if you don't communicate directly with the Congressman's office, which you absolutely are welcome to do, certainly send us questions and any suggestions that you might have for us that we could do to help you better help to fight this. So I think that we're ready to conclude. We had some good questions, and we had some good attendance here, and we did record this, so we will be sharing this on our website as an informative link, and then also on social media to help to get the word out as much as we can.
Thank you. And just for the record, on the J1, my chief of staff, Mary Noonan, just reminded me, I had signed the letter. We're going to do it again, trying to, encourage the project, the program, I should say. But it's hard to say, no criticism, but it's hard to say what the administration is going to do. My hope is that they'll be as robust as possible, because, we need to come out of this. I mean, we saw with PPP, we saw with all the other initiatives that, they were lifelines, but, they don't last as long. You even said yourself that some of the money has run out, for the restaurants, and that's unfortunate. But if we don't have that, they want to, get back into the business, and sooner the better. I
think one of our challenges in New Jersey with that is that the J1 program is not at the forefront of as an issue nationally. A lot of other states do not use it, and they certainly, there are many states that may use it, but not as much as we do. So we certainly rely on it heavily, our coastal community, specifically in the summertime. So thank you for getting into that topic as well with us. And we will certainly be in touch, and we really do once again appreciate you being with us today. It's very nice to see you, Congressman.
Thank you. And Amanda, good to see you, and say hello to Scott.
I will. Good to see you too. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Take care now.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Will.
She was very nice.